Welcome to the 20th episode of Shot Nostalgia, where we continue our drive back into the history of wrestling and fully immerse ourselves in a timeline. We are continuing the journey through 1996 WCW to relive one of the most memorable years in all of wrestling. As always, I'm the ace of the tavern, Stephen ACEFIELD. As you can tell, I'm Mr. Solo Dolo tonight. Mike Belcaster getting prepared for All Out Weekend. And when you are watching this, I'm actually with Mike Belcaster, time traveling into the future. We are about to head off to Rampage, if I'm predicting well. Going to be checking out all the events happening in Chicago this weekend. GCW War Games. We also have, obviously, AEW All Out. And we got some tavern hangs. It's going to be myself, the OG Fit Kid Tom, Mike Belcaster, taking in all the sights and scenes of Chicago. But we are here still to give you your weekly shot of nostalgia to talk about 1996 WCW. And man, we have two good episodes to bring to you, very much so, here on the Tavern. And yeah, I mean, last week was a three-parter. It was a lot. We got through it. We fit in that Clash of Champions, and we talked about comparing it to Battle of the Belts and how Tony Khan uses it as a mechanism to continue to tell stories. But we have two Nitros, and it's the go-home show. Very apropos. We have the go-home show before Fall Brawl. This Wednesday, we just saw the go-home show for AEW All Out. And man, we have a lot more questions than we have answers, but we have a lot of answers throughout the newsletter. And let's get into the newsletter. Let's talk about Happy Hour and see what Dave Meltzer's having to say here, because you know he's our guide through all of history of wrestling. All right, as we continue to drive back into 1996, Dave Meltzer is our tour guide, like we talked about on the Jungle Cruise of life. He's hidden there and hitting all the spots and talking about the August 26th newsletter and also the September 2nd newsletter, because those are the two Nitros that we are covering today. And like I said, two episodes of Nitro to get into. And the go-home show of Fall Brawl, and it's funny, we have the full card to kind of go through, and I guess I'll put it on the bottom because we're about 3 weeks away, and I think we had the full card established all the way back 3-4 weeks ago, and that's a much different build than we're having with AEW All Out, where we didn't have a lot of matches announced. As of Wednesday, we didn't even have a main event. But here in WCW 1996, it's a much different type of building up a lot with the New World Order and the Four Horsemen. But let's hop right into the newsletter, as I mentioned. And from the August 26th newsletter written by Dave Meltzer, the restraining order hearing involving the WWF lawsuit against WCW for trademark infringement was scheduled to take place this week, but a settlement between the two sides on that aspect took place before the hearing. So Mike and I have been talking about pettiness throughout all of this Attitude Era and also WCW, the Monday Night Wars. It seems like it's sort of simmering. We haven't seen a lot of WWF and WCW throughout the newsletter in the past few weeks. The newsletter has been a little thin, not as dramatic, but I'm sure we'll get there as, you know, as they say, drama does follow both WWF and WCW, and we're definitely not seeing the last of it, but it's kind of the calm before the storm. So in a consent order signed by both sides, WCW agreed to not have any employees or independent contractors who work for the company call Scott Hall either Razor Ramon or the bad guy, and same goes for Kevin Nash not being called Diesel or Big Daddy Cool. In addition, WCW will not be allowed to state that either Hall or Nash currently work for WWF. Since WCW wasn't allowed to do any of that anyway, it appeared to be pretty much an amicable deal. Apparently there's heat within WCW because WWF was able to find out about inter-office memos sent when Hall and Nash first started working for the company, where they were called by their Titan names, which will no doubt be used by Titan in a lawsuit aspect of the case. So we have, I guess, a lot to break down there. Obviously, WCW was using the fact that they were in WWF prior to build this outsider lore to two guys trying to take over the company and using WWF against themselves in this ratings war. But I guess the more troubling thing I see here is the ratings, the inter-office memos that are being intercepted, and whether that's by Razor Ramon and Scott Hall, whether it's somebody else, it just shows that, again, how petty it is that people are using communications to find out information that, and who knows if that could be used in the court of law, because it was not obtained under, I guess, in a good way. I guess I would be able to say that. It wasn't obtained in a way that could be respected, because obviously it was not under grounds of something they should have been seeing, but obviously being referred to as Kevin Nash, Big Daddy Cool, or Diesel, or the bad guy Razor Ramon, that's a no-no. And WCW was using the assumption of who they were and fans' idea of who they were, and they were such big stars they didn't need to be known as that as those characters. They were just assumed to be, and I guess that's where the gray area was, and they need to address it. So as we know, Titan's still bringing the lawsuit forward, asking for damages from WCW for trademark infringement and unfair competitive practices with no date set as of yet for the jury trial. So we also have in the other legal entanglements that's going on throughout the build to Fall Brawl, the situation regarding Sean Waltman seems to have wound up with 123 Kid temporarily being locked up as a pawn between both sides. We see the fourth member of the NWO join in Nitro, and we'll talk about everything that went on with that. Everyone assumed it was going to be Waltman. They teased it multiple times, and we know eventually that Waltman, X-Pac, 123 Kid 6, whoever you want to call him as, finds his way into WCW, but he's the unlucky person here that he's the guy in between they're going to make an example of. So now apparently WWF agreed to give Waltman a release from his contract, and Waltman reached a deal with WCW as we had talked about weeks going forward. And he was supposed to debut on August 10th as the fourth member of NWO. However, before signing the release, WWF listed not only the name 123 Kid, but the mannerisms, dress, and look of the character that they claimed as intellectual property. So same thing with Razor Ramon. We have a lot going on with 123 Kid. Trying to lock up his mannerisms is challenging because what makes 123 Kid or Waltman very popular is the things he can do in the ring. So does that mean his moveset? Does that mean his taunts? Does that mean his likeness? Could you copyright some guy's mullet? Because that's at that time, it's 123 Kid's face. So the look of the character they claimed as intellectual property, since it wasn't settled and still isn't settled. Waltman is tied up, and obviously it may not be something that comes to fruition, but the fact that it's tied up in a legal sense stops him from debuting, and at least it bothers WCW in that way. So maybe WWF knows that they're not actually going to have a stance here and they're going to be able to win it, but the fact that Waltman is tied up, it's inconveniencing them in their build, and they had to change their plans. And obviously we see the Giant joins in with NWO and all that goes on with that. And we'll talk about that because that has big ramifications, and we saw later shoot interviews about why they did what they did and why they wanted the Giant there, and backstage politics play a part, brother. But I wonder what it would have been. And we saw Waltman. He'll eventually join, like I mentioned, but wonder what it would have been. Maybe the Giant would have never joined in the first place if they didn't have to pivot. So Sean Waltman continued to do media talking about him leaving WWF, and he did an interview with Prodigy with Bob Ryder, believing that he's become a pawn in the lawsuit. In addition, both WWF and WCW have been carefully scrutinizing the WCW hotline for veiled mentions of 123 Kid, because since Waltman hasn't been released, if there are any mentions, WWF can use it as a lawsuit ammunition that here WCW is still talking about bringing in talent that's under contract. So we also see a mention of Bret Hart in there, that potentially he's part of a tampering issue as well. But we see WWF is fighting fire with fire, and they do not want what happened with Razor and Kevin Nash to happen again. So we saw this, to bring it back to modern day in 2022. We saw some of that pop up into the current day newsletter, and I think last month was when they had that private closed-door meeting to talk about all the egos and the drama going on in AEW, and part of that was WWE reaching out to under contract wrestlers under the AEW umbrella and reached out to say, you are not to do that, or we're going to pursue legal action. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. And inside this sort of Monday Night War that we are seeing evolve and blossom over time, that's only going to get more interesting throughout the 90s, a lot of it is repeating itself. And I know we talk about Tony Khan being a WCW fan in a lot of ways, but let's hope he can rewrite history, because we see a lot of the 2001 drama of WCW with all the different egos and the politics that come into play and having to make booking decisions and all this guaranteed money. We don't want it to turn the other way so quickly. We talk about AEW being in its infancy, that they're still growing, but you don't want to make the same mistakes that Eric Bischoff, Vince Russo, and everybody in that WCW locker room made by giving too many talent, I guess too much money, too much leverage, too many decision-making possibilities, that it hampered the build. And I'm not saying AEW is there yet, but just the drama that's been unfolding is reminiscent of what happened in WCW in those latter years before they closed down. And I would just hope that Tony Khan knows what he's doing, that he can right the ship, that All Out is that banger show we're fully expecting. I want it to be that show. That's that major show. All Out was a very memorable event last year. And, I'll be in the building, as I mentioned, with Mike Belcaster and Tom, and we're definitely going to take it in and enjoy the atmosphere. But there's a lot on the line here. And, not to put too much pressure on AEW and Tony Khan, they have a lot to prove here to right the ship, because there's television contracts at stake. There's negotiations that need to be had to keep them on a major network. So they have to be able to pull through, and hopefully Tony can kind of weather the storm and know what he's doing. Moving down in the newsletter, WCW ran its third live show in the space of 5 days, as we mentioned last week, with a Clash of Champions special from the Denver Coliseum, which aired on August 15th. Due to the rush nature of trying to cram 8 matches into a 2-hour format, Meltzer notes that it came off more like a Thursday Nitro than a special major show with only one strong match. The show drew a full house of 8,304 fans, with 5,931 paying $70,000 at the gate. So, similar to the criticism we hear on the AEW wrap-up show on the flagship, how Battle of the Belts just feels like an extra hour of Rampage, 1996 in black and white print, we see that Meltzer is saying the same thing about Clash of Champions, that it needs to be treated like a special occasion, crammed into 2 hours or 8 matches, and it felt like just an extension of Nitro, and that shouldn't be the case. But the difference is Nitro has, or WCW I should say, has pay-per-views to bridge the gap. AEW only has those special events, the 4 pay-per-views a year. The next one we have after All Out is November with Full Gear. And at this point, you need to use that Battle of the Belts as a bridge, as a storytelling mechanism to get you from point A to point B with the special event. WCW had pay-per-views upon pay-per-views. They got Fall Brawl, Halloween Havoc to follow. So these Clash of Champions are sprinkles on top of the Sunday. For AEW, in the way things work with them, they need Battle of the Belts to feel important, because, and all those other events, Fyter Fest, Beach Break, all those things need to feel special, because if they don't, it's a long time to get to these big events to keep the fans' interest. All right, talking about ratings for that Clash of Champions, the show drew a 3.5 rating and a 6.2 share in 2.2 million homes. Meltzer notes that it's not a bad number, although well down from the 4.5 that January's Clash did, and that's with Hogan vs. Flair from Denver, which is the best mainstream match to deliver television ratings, with the possible exception of Hogan and Savage, which we do know we're going to get at Halloween Havoc. So the basic feeling in the locker room is that since it came a few days after a pay-per-view, it wasn't hyped anywhere near the level of the previous Clash shows, and to most, it was just a second edition of Nitro, and the rating reflected that. Moving down, with Dean Malenko is expected to regain the Cruiserweight Championship. It seems like he's very, very highly touted in the locker room. We see how impressive he is. In 1996, we're talking a lot about Rey Mysterio's ability in the ring, but his dance partner is usually Dean Malenko, and Dean Malenko's having banger matches every single week. So they're expected to put the title back on him from Rey Mysterio. They note that it won't be for another 2 months, so maybe before the end of the year, we'll see Malenko win the Cruiserweight Championship back. But either way, these Cruiserweight division matches feel very important. Every person feels interchangeable. As we'll talk about on Nitro, we see Dean Malenko being defeated, and doesn't feel weird, by someone who's debuting with Chris Jericho, and he doesn't have that many matches under his belt under the WCW umbrella, but he still beats Dean Malenko, and it doesn't feel weird. It feels like everybody's interchangeable, with the championship to change hands at any given week, and that's fun, and I think that's important to have as a staple, as a foundation for Nitro, because people are starting to tune in for the high-flying action that delivers on every single week. We have Super Callows is scheduled to work TV tapings leading up to the pay-per-view, while Juventud Guerrera, probably under a new ring name, is expected in October. So we see Juvi in the opening match on Nitro, I think in the first week we cover. So curious to see what they change his gimmick to. Juventud is definitely from my memory, he was a mainstay in WCW in that division for a while. He did do his little stint in WWE with the Mexicool gimmick, and he had some heat, if I remember, on the dirt sheets, just talking about how he believed he was the Mexican Rock, and he had an ego to himself and wanted to fly a private jet. So I'm curious to look back into that newsletter, but that obviously would be like, I think 2005-ish is when he was in WWE, but I wonder if the ego rears its head in the newsletter in further editions. So preliminary estimates on the Hog Wild pay-per-view have ranged from 0.4 to 0.7, with most reliable figures at 0.62, although that's with a smaller universe, since much of the West Coast was blacked out, as we talked about. We had that weather play a part. And even though Hogan appeared on the show, it was structured that he didn't get a 25% cut from the show. Remember, revenue and pay was based on pay-per-view buy rates. It's a completely different world than we live in today with guaranteed contracts and the money that comes in from the streaming deals. The buy rates and the views don't really matter as much, except for future negotiations for TV deals as leverage to say, hey, we have this amount of stock with the people and the people want to see our product. But back in the day, live gates, I should say, with ticket prices and also pay-per-view buys was a huge, huge deal. And this was very important to remember that guys are getting paid based on how the pay-per-views did. So, you see some urgency in the booking. And maybe that's what we're seeing here. And I know Tony Khan's pay structure is based on that as well. They don't have a streaming deal. They don't have the luxury of just saying, hey, we get a certain amount of money from Peacock a year that we could just throw whatever on the card. So, which makes the booking even more puzzling. But originally there wasn't going to be a live Raw on September 23rd because so many of the big names would be in Japan for the Yokohama Arena tournament. But a show has been added for Birmingham, Alabama. So interesting to see WWF is working with with Japan. I'm not sure if it's New Japan Pro Wrestling or a different promotion, but it's funny that WCW put a show out there with pretty much nobody there. We talked about Macho, the Giant, Hogan, Flair. They were all appearing in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and they still had a Nitro, and Raw was like, we probably won't put it on there because we don't have our top guys. Just shows a different set of mindsets. All right, moving to the September 2nd newsletter. So besides Nitro, other weekend ratings, so Saturday night at 2.5, the Sunday Pro in the new time slot at 1.5, and main event at 1.6. So highlights from the 820 Dalton, Georgia taping included Jericho's debut against Jeremy Lin. I should say Jerry Lynn. I don't know if his actual birth name is Jeremy, but I apologize, Jerry Lynn. So Mr. JL. They don't mention that he's Jerry Lynn in here. This is only based on knowledge that we talked about. And I know they mentioned it on the Extra Cooler show. They covered War Games 1995. Mr. JL made an appearance in there under a mask, and I think they didn't know until after they were done recording that it was Jerry Lynn. Not many people know about Jerry Lynn in WCW, but it's interesting when you think about Jericho and Jerry Lynn's history in ECW and how well touted Jerry Lynn is, and I think he's still involved in AEW today. But they did not have a good match, allegedly. Rick Steiner appeared in a handicap match since Scott was injured against the Nasty Boys, and Regal won the TV title from Lex Luger, and this will all air on 8/31/1996. So by the time the September 2nd Nitro airs, Regal will be holding the TV title as well. We talked about in the newsletter. We knew that they wanted to put the TV title on him. I'm just happy they took the TV title off of Lex Luger, because at this point, it was becoming a prop. He was involved in other storylines. First, it was the Tag Team Championship with Sting. Now it's involved with the New World Order. The TV title deserves to be appreciated and showcased in a big way, and I think I'm very much looking forward to Regal having that title around his waist and see what they can do with it. Hopefully they bring Finlay back. We can have those banger matches between the two of them. We have Mike Tenay is debuting as the third announcer for the second hour of Nitro on the second Nitro Recovering on September 2nd. So Mike Tenay was exclusively being brought in just to cover the Lucha matches, the Cruiserweight division, as a special analyst, but now he's coming full-time, and we've seen Mike Tenay spend a significant amount of time in WCW, so not sure if it's seamless, if he continues all the way through, but in 1996, we're going to be seeing a lot of him going forward, except for just the Cruiserweight matches, so very, very cool stuff. Mike Tenay has some great calls for TNA as well, so he spent a lot of significant time at the announce desk, and he's just as much of a voice of WCW as Tony Schiavone became. Mike Tenay is a voice of some generation of WCW fans. Tony Schiavone is the mainstay. He's the Jim Ross of WCW, I would say, for this era of wrestling. But Mike Tenay deserves his props as well. And I know Mike Belcaster loves Mike Tenay as well, so I'm sure he'll be happy he'll be on the call going forward. Dusty Rhodes is trying to work himself into the role as a coach of the WCW team to counteract DiBiase. So we see DiBiase that he's sort of become the figurehead, and we'll talk about his debut on Nitro, just showing up in the crowd and how we feel about it. But Dusty Rhodes is trying to get in the mix to be a non-active participant in the storyline, so we'll see how that shakes out as well. Scotty Riggs is injured, so Bagwell has been teaming with others like Jim Powers. Mysterio Jr.'s title defense at Halloween Havoc against Dean Malenko, which is what they're building, will be a 2 out of 3 falls match, at least according to the last plans we know of it, since this stuff changes daily. So I'm looking forward to that if that is exactly where they go. We'll see if Dave Meltzer was on the money there. I don't have the Halloween Havoc card in front of me, but anytime Mysterio and Dean Malenko lock up, really anyone that Mysterio locks up with has been epic all year. Same thing with Dean Malenko. So this match is sure to... I mean, we'll see what they can pull out because we've seen them wrestle so many times. It seems like each match tops itself. So I'm very curious on what they do. And 2 out of 3 falls is just, those two guys just never stop. So it's going to be awesome to see. And see how long they go on pay-per-view. Some of these matches are longer. And a lot of the Mysterio matches around the 10 to 15 minute mark. That's kind of the sweet spot. We'll see if they can fit 2 or 3 falls, or maybe 3 falls in total in 15, 20 minutes. I'm very excited for that. World War III pay-per-view will be on November 24th at the Norfolk Scope. Juvi Guerrera and Rey Mysterio Jr. are booked as a tag team working with Conan and Super Calo at house shows. That's a great run. And we see some of the house shows set for the next couple weeks building up to Halloween Havoc after Fall Brawl. The house show set for October 26th in Sacramento at the Arc Arena was canceled, so they'll have an extra day in town to promote Halloween Havoc show in Vegas. So the October and November tapings are all listed. So very seamed out, and seems like they're going from city to city, eventually ending up in Augusta, Georgia, right before the November pay-per-view. So you guys can check that out if you want. If you guys want to check out where they're going to be going, or just want to be surprised when I'm on here. But the cities are always interesting. I know they were in Wyoming last week. These are cities and states that WWF was not running. So this is definitely a hotbed for WCW, whether it was Greenwood, South Carolina, whether it was Memphis, Tennessee, Anderson, South Carolina, St. Petersburg, Florida, Gainesville, Georgia, Greenville, North Carolina, as I mentioned, Augusta. We talked about the Bayfront. All these spots, Mentaco, Minnesota, these are WCW hotbeds and markets. And I know we've seen AEW return to some of these spots, specifically West Virginia, where the Chads and Tom had taken in all of Dynamite. But WWF still doesn't go to these markets, and they're very exclusively running the cities they're comfortable in, like the East Coast cities, be it New York or Boston. So some of these hotbeds are desperate for wrestling. I mean, Rockville, South Carolina on Saturday, November 19th, is sure to be banging for WCW. I would love to see AEW go back there. There is another outsider on the booking sheet starting on September 28th in Columbus, Ohio as outsider number 4. It's assumed to be Sean Waltman, and they're going to be facing Jim Powers, and number 5 teams with Hall and Nash versus Flair, Anderson, and Benoit. So Meltzer conjectures, I don't believe Jeff Jarrett is free for another week. Davey Boy Smith's original contract was up this week, and he hadn't heard they had officially signed, but he's certainly being pushed in WWF as if he's in their long-term plans since they seem to be grooming him for the tag team championships. Whoever number 5 has to be a big name because he's going to be working a singles program with Sting. So I forget the progression of who joins NWO. Remember, it seems everybody does join, and it becomes less interesting over time because everyone was giving one of those NWO shirts, and that was the joke as the limousine got bigger and bigger. Everyone kept hopping out, be it Disco Inferno and Conan. Everybody does eventually join the New World Order. But this time, in the dirt sheets in 1996, it's still very important about who's joining. And we see the Giant is joining, and then eventually Waltman does join. DiBiase's part of the fold. It was still a very exclusive club before it became spammed, if you will, with members. So finishing up here, 1024 in Stockton and 1025 in San Jose has Savage vs. Giant, Flair vs. Eddie Guerrero for the U.S. title, Hall and Nash, and number 5, who we assume to be Waltman, versus Anderson and Benoit and McMichael, Luger and Sting versus the Steiners, Sullivan and Conan versus the American Males, and Jericho versus Morris, Mysterio Jr. versus Malenko for the Cruiserweight title, and Calo versus Guerrero Jr. That's Chavo. So that's the newsletter in full. We got a little more meat on the bone here than we did the last couple weeks. So we went about 25 minutes. So we're going to use that knowledge in the newsletter to get our fix. We're going to wet our whistles. We're going to talk all about the 2 episodes of Nitro. The August 26th episode of Nitro from Palmetto, Florida at the Manatee Civic Center is up first. And then the September 2nd episode is just as juicy as well. from Chattanooga, Tennessee, the UTC Arena, talking about everything going on in WCW. Grab a drink, guys. Get our fix. All right, it's time to get our fix and talk all about WCW Nitro. As I mentioned, from August 26th, 1996, from Palmetto, Florida, the Manatee Civic Center. Our current WCW champions are as followed. Our world champion is still that dude, Hollywood Hogan, who won it back on August 10th, 1996 at Hog Wild, live from Sturgis, South Dakota. Our WCW US champion is Ric Flair. He won it back on July 7th, 1996. Our world tag team champions are Harlem Heat. They won it back on July 27th, still embroiled in a feud with the Nasty Boys. I'm hoping that ends soon. And our WCW World Television Champion is Lex Luger as of March 6, 1996. That's going to change soon, as we talked about in the newsletter. And, of course, our Cruiserweight Champion is Rey Mysterio Jr. from July 8th, 1996. So there was no Raw going up against Nitro this week, just to give you guys a little bit of context due to the coverage of the U.S. Open on the USA Network, which means WCW was completely unopposed. So people were locked in watching the product, and this was a big deal. If you guys remember back in the day, WCW was preempted for things like the U.S. Open, things like the dog show. I remember the Westminster Dog Show. I had to stay up late to watch at 11 p.m., and my 10-year-old eyes were having a hard time staying open as I get ready for school the next day. But somehow I'd make it through and watch all of Raw, because that's what you had to do. You couldn't just check out the results on YouTube. You had to know what happened the next day at school. But this was just full attention from wrestling fans in WCW land. Everyone was talking about and watching WCW because there was no Raw going up against it. They did air at 11 p.m. that night on the East Coast. So as we mentioned, hour number one, we have the split shifts of the announcers. Tony Schiavone, Larry Zbyszko open the show. And we get a hot match to open the show. Juvi Guerrera and Billy Kidman go at it. They ring the bell like 3 times before it begins. This is Juventude's WCW debut, so we talk about him as a mainstay throughout all of the 90s in the early 2000s. Juvi eventually gets to shine in WWE with the Mexicool gimmick. I mean, terrible thing, but they do team him with Psychosis and Super Crazy, so on paper they're a great team, but the gimmick itself leaves a lot to be desired as the Mexicools. But Juvi here in his WCW debut, he fits like a glove in what's going on at the time on Nitro. And I think it's quite fitting considering the rivalry that would bring and bridge throughout the next 2 years or so was with Billy Kidman. So it's funny that they debuted together, but Billy Kidman and Juvi Guerrero definitely were tied throughout history, and Billy Kidman didn't quite come into his own. This is pre tank top, jean shorts, flock level Billy Kidman when he gets his rub from Goldberg and gets the rub from Hulk Hogan later on. So Tony Schiavone goes all out for Juvi's debut, and even going as far as to mention his father, Fuerza. So they did a lot of background about Juventud Guerrera and what he means. So it just proves to me, like, when you do a little bit of homework, even on a debut, it makes people feel important. We talked about that with Mike Tenay when he popped in for those Cruiserweight matches and talked about guys like Psychosis, guys like Rey Mysterio, and talk about why they're important, why you should care about them. It adds so much leverage and importance to the match. And this is the first time he's appearing on your TV. And you feel like, oh, I should know this guy. So a little bit goes a long way when you start to just talk about it. Why not mention things that happen in other promotions? It helps build up your star. So this is the pre-Flock era of Billy Kidman, as I mentioned. He's a clean-cut kid with a fancy finisher. So this match goes 3 minutes and 43 seconds. He does. So the match, so Kidman wins the suplex battle for 2. Of course, the crowd down in Florida doesn't know who Juvi is and that he's in for a push. The Shooting Star Press only gets a 2 count. So we're used to seeing that finish a lot of people off, whether it be in WWE during his Cruiserweight champion run. In WCW, we saw it end matches as well. Juvi stops Kidman up on the top and Hurricane Rana's down for the 1-2-3. So no matter what goes on, this match was electric. 3 minutes and 43 seconds. The crowd does turn on Guerrero despite him being booked as a face here. So if they wanted him to be cheered, they probably shouldn't have put him against Kidman. We see them locked up. Billy Kidman's very much liked because the Shooting Star Press is something that people weren't seeing. You know, and I was talking about this with a friend at a wrestling show a while ago, and they were spamming Canadian Destroyers. And we saw Edge do a Canadian Destroyer a week or so ago on Raw. But at the time when Amazing Red debuted the Canadian Destroyer, it was on TNA. And I remember people were sharing the video. And this was like 2003-ish, so not the early days of the internet, but not as accessible as it is today with Instagram and social media. That move was incredible. At that time, this is the same thing with shooting star press. We see people do more than the shooting star press now. It happens on Dynamite in the middle of a match, doesn't finish. We see things that Sammy Guevara does is beyond belief, but you got to put it in context. At the time, the shooting star press pretty much got Billy Kidman over and made people care about him. So Gene Okerlund tries to get a word with Hoovy after the match. Hoovy's having a hard time speaking English. He eventually gets kind of a grip on the language later on in his career, but definitely not here. So a tough interview for his debut, but this was a good match. Even though it was 3 minutes and 43 seconds, it's worth checking out. So we get another Glacier promo. I think we're going to see his debut next month. I hope so. Messages are out to Ray Lloyd. We would love you on the show, dude, if you want to talk about your time in WCW. Come out here. We'll be very kind to. I think Mike's the biggest Glacier fan in the world. So love to get him on here. We do have a flashback to last week. Sting and Luger X, the Four Horsemen, if Benoit and Mongo will step aside so they could be a part of Team WCW against the NWO at Fall Brawl and War Games. So we see people putting their differences aside, as we talked about last week, putting their differences aside to fight the bigger enemy, which is the New World Order. So I like this build kind of intertwined throughout all of the show. And more about that later, because we're going to talk about more about the Four Horsemen and Sting and Luger putting their differences aside. The next match here, we have Big Bubba and my good friend, my personal close friend, Kevin Sullivan with Jimmy Hart, defeating Marcus Bagwell and Jim Powers with Teddy Long. So as we talked about in the newsletter, Scotty Riggs is hurt, so Jim Powers takes his place. He was doing it on the house shows. He's doing it here on Nitro. We do know Jim Powers is an American male too. Truly, he is American and he is a male. So yeah, he fits into the American males, I guess, but if you want to do the stretch there. This match goes 4 minutes and 26 seconds. The finish goes Sullivan knees Bagwell to the floor while Bubba gives Powers the Bubba Slam for the 3. So this was a nice little match in Sullivan's backyard. This is where he's from. Okerlund continues after. He wants to be interviewing Big Bubba and Kevin Sullivan. So Nick Patrick was also part of this match as well. He did call it down the middle, but there was, people talk a little bit about how he's evil and he's turning heel. So because he didn't raise his arm up in time, and ref Nick Patrick says he got it up at 2 anyway. Not sure if that was a botch or they're trying to make Nick Patrick into this evil character. It worked either way. So Nick Patrick as a heel referee. I like that dynamic. I like that the NWO has a referee in their pocket, and there's enough reasonable doubt to not just fire him all outright. There's a lot you can say about him making mistakes, and they seem all coincidental, but we all know they're not, because Nick Patrick is that shiesty referee. As I mentioned, Gene Okerlund interviews Bubba, Sullivan, Jimmy Hart. After the match, Big Bubba said he's no longer looking to be overlooked for title matches and main events. He wants to be involved in the main event. So he also calls out Glacier and says, if you're going to be here, come here. Come on. Get you some of Bubba. Sullivan goes into told you so mode again about Hulk Hogan. And then he mentions something about Okerlund hanging out with Hogan lately. And Gene just shakes his head and denies everything that went on. And that's a nice little interview here. And maybe it's because I met Kevin Sullivan. Maybe because I spent some time with him. He's growing on me a little bit. And it's a shame that we're going to see the end of Dungeon of Doom as he's starting to grow on me. But yeah, Kevin Sullivan, this was a decent interview. So after the break, Gene's in the back with Sting and Luger. And again, we get more with them talking about the Horsemen and trying to figure out how to put their differences aside for the larger picture at hand, which is the enemies of the New World Order. Following this, we get a WCW World Cruiserweight Championship match. Rey Mysterio taking on Mr. JL. As we know, it's Jerry Lynn. So Larry Zbyszko proposes invested in the wrestling mass market. He's talking about all these guys in different masks and how they could be produced as merchandise. And it's true. If you ever talk to people that's ever been to see a AAA show in Mexico or CMLL, down the streets, not even just in the arena, there's the lucha mask all over on street corners where people can buy different masks, whether it be a Rey Mysterio mask or just masks that are generalized luchas that you may not know of. So there's a lot of masks out there that are just really cool, and we obviously know the famous ones: Rey Mysterio, Psychosis, Penta now, a very famous mask. But there's a lot of masks that get sold, and that's a huge merchandising option that I don't think a lot of wrestling companies capitalize that far on. WWE was selling a lot of the Rey Mysterio masks, but something really cool about selling that merchandise and having the same mask that someone in the ring wears. Because, you talk about they sell the Roman Reigns like armband, they sell the different attires, the things that look like tights, but when you can look exactly like the guy that's your favorite wrestler, something to be said about that. This match was really, really good. 11 minutes and 33 seconds. It goes all out. So we see a lot of distractions in the match, just in general. So Ray flips JL out of the floor and tries a baseball slide, but Jerry Lynn ducks and backs Ray into the guardrail. He tries to whip Ray into the steps, but Ray grabs him and jumps onto the steps and leaps onto Jerry Lynn for a head scissors down the aisle. So he gets back in the ring. Springboard Hurricane Rana gets the 3 count. Man, this was an awesome match. Jerry Lynn playing the heel here as well. So, I mean, what can you say? I mean, Dean Malenko's at ringside, distracting people. Tony and Larry spend the whole match pretty much talking about how disgusting the New World Order is. So a little bit of distraction. Matches, as we know in WCW, in some spots have become secondary. So, but great match. They give it time on TV. So, like I said, 11 minutes and 33 seconds. A lot of good stuff. Jerry Lynn is using submissions as well. He's high flying, but also mat driven with the technical wrestling. Very, very good match, like I mentioned. Worth watching. And that leads us into hour 2. Eric Bischoff and Bobby Heenan take control of the call. And to the back, Gene has the attention of Benoit, Steve McMichael, and all the women. We have, obviously, Elizabeth. We have Woman herself. Woman does mention about Kevin Sullivan, what he said about Gene's good friend Hogan. So maybe there's something to this. Maybe we're going to talk about Gene Okerlund's turning heel, or maybe they had it planned in the first place. Liz was just in the back, and she's just there, and she doesn't really say anything. So, and then Deborah, of course, spends the whole time staring at the camera and smiling. So we'll see what they do with this and see if Gene Okerlund rears his head as has to defend his honor. It's always interesting, too, like Nick Patrick, it's a different layer of how intrusive the New World Order has become throughout all of the product. So we have, obviously, Nick Patrick as that shiesty referee, the guy who gets one over, and with a referee in your pocket, people are unstoppable, right? If you have a guy that can make the calls for you and just add, you can not only cheat, you have the numbers game, and you have a referee in your pocket, you're unbeatable. And what happens if Gene Okerlund is also who has pull in the backstage area, who we know he's on the hotline, kayfabe-wise, imagine he's in the pocket of the New World Order. It was, even though we know it's not happening, it suspends belief a little bit and makes it a lot of fun. Makes the world immersive, which is what I want from my wrestling. We get flashback to the last 2 weeks. Randy Savage gets hit with the chair from Hogan on August 12th during that match with Ric Flair on August 19th. He's back in the ring talking about getting revenge on Hogan and getting revenge on the Giant for losing the WCW Championship to Hogan. Like, he's mad at Hogan. So, he's mad at the Giant for losing to Hogan. In last week's main event, Randy Savage beat up the Dungeon of Doom with the steel chair. He's come back. He's unhinged. They're definitely trying to get that over, giving him a little bit of that Pillman vibe that we saw early in 1996. He is unhinged, like no other word about it. And we're going to see Randy Savage and Hogan go at it at Halloween Havoc. We know Slim Jim wants it, brother. That means it's going to happen. Whether the build gets there or not, doesn't matter. We're getting Randy Savage versus Hulk Hogan in the main event of Halloween Havoc, and I'm here for it. I'm pumped for it. We get Gene Okerlund, who's all over the show again, backstage with Randy Savage, and he says his match with Hollywood Hogan at Halloween Havoc will be scary. He doesn't care if you care about WCW. He's in the zone. Yeah, so he's just hyping up the match. And again, this is also like insight. At this point, it's August 26th, and they're talking about the main event in October. It's unheard of. Long-term storytelling, guys. This is how you do it. And there's only 2 hours of Nitro that they're using for this. You use backstage interviews in an appropriate way, not just kind of as Rampage commercials as we see on Dynamite. This is done in a really good way with personalities you care about. And even though Hogan has his plate full during War Games, they're still building up towards the main event at the following pay-per-view. It goes a really long way by just mentioning it. So the build feels longer and feels more important. In a not so important match, we have the Giant taking on Jim Duggan. So Jimmy Hart grabs Duggan's leg to start the match. Why do we need that? The Giant, we know, is going to steamroll Jim Duggan. Giant tries to attack from behind, but Duggan tosses Jimmy's jacket back into Giant's face and punches him in the face. So Giant Irish whips Duggan into the ring post and avoids the charge. Duggan goes for a slam, and wait a minute. Here comes Ted DiBiase coming through the crowd, and he takes a seat. The fans react and they're confused as to why DiBiase's there. Most of them didn't see him until they showed him on the screen. Very similar to Lex Luger appearing on that first Nitro back in 1995, just comes through the crowd. Meanwhile, Duggan winds up with his tape fist. He connects, but Giant no-sells and begs for another one. This time the Giant staggered, and Jimmy Hart grabs the 2x4 to distract Duggan. We get the chokeslam, cover, 1, 2, 3. Match goes 4 minutes and 37 seconds, and the camera shifts to DiBiase, who lifts up 4 fingers. So he is number 4, allegedly. And I want to get Mike's take on this next week. He talked about DiBiase being a non-factor as far as his interest goes. He, at this point, is 6 years removed from being like in his prime. I said in WWF as the $1 Million Man. Obviously, 1993-ish, he's still hanging around as an active competitor. I don't know if I would have coined DiBiase being an effective person as the 4th man. Doesn't really have the importance for me when he shows up. And maybe that's recency bias because it doesn't, but I don't know. I'm curious what Mike says about rewatching this debut, and I'll obviously ask about it next week and see what he feels about it for you guys to hear. He says next week they'll be number 5. Could he mean for the New World Order? Bischoff tries to think positive and say that he's going to be the 5th Horseman, but that's the most unrealistic positive thinking that we can even talk about. Why would he be joining the Horsemen? Because you would call it the 5 Horsemen. But yeah, this was a weird debut. In the middle of a Giant and Duggan match, this is how you debut him. It wasn't like during a New World Order segment, not during a Hogan match. We do know it's connected because the Giant eventually does join the New World Order as member number 5. But I don't know if they needed a manager. All 3 guys are so good on the mic. Having DiBiase there as a non-active competitor, I don't know, it doesn't go over as well for me all these years later. So Gene Okerlund talks to the Giant and Jimmy Hart while Gene is in total shock over Ted DiBiase showing up, trying to really sell it, trying to get people to feel like it's a shocking moment. Maybe it was at the time. Maybe people felt like, holy crap. But we've been seeing DiBiase show up in the newsletter over and over again as like he is that through and through WWF guy that would be on the same playing field as a Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and I don't see that at all. So maybe people feel a different way about Ted DiBiase, and he is technically a former WWF champion, won the title and then had to sell it. Well, Andre won it and then sold it back to him. So he is a WWF legend, but I don't know in the reality-based type of characters that you're building, if Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, who, he's in a black suit, he's not wearing the flashy $1 Million suit, if he's the guy that you want really joining to make an impact. But, the Giant responds to Randy Savage's accusation over dropping the ball for WCW. He tells the camera that he's the World Heavyweight Champion. And then he says he's going to beat Hogan for the belt. We get an advertisement for the Hog Wild VHS tape, which is only $20. And you also get a Macho Man bandana, which will be free if you order the VHS. So I love that they include some of these commercials. And I know on the Clash of Champions last week, there were so many commercials left in. Not even just wrestling related. They're inside the TBS broadcast. So I guess someone didn't do a lot of trimming. So there's, gum and there's a Kodak commercial and there's car commercials all inside of it because it's just the broadcast as is. So we're lucky enough to get some of the wrestling driven commercials here from TNT, like the Hog Wild VHS tape. We also have, the shirts and the stuff that they're trying to sell. But we're not lucky enough to have all of the commercials. We do get the WCW magazine one, which is cool. So finishing up the card, we have a few matches left. We have Ric Flair and Arn Anderson taking on Rock and Roll Express. This was a quick match, 4 minutes and 29 seconds. Obviously, the Horsemen get the win here. Truly, these guys can wrestle each other blind. We know that Morton and Gibson and Flair have a long history. Obviously, Arn as well. So they get some offense in. It wasn't just a complete squash match. But there is some chaos at the end, and the action breaks down with all 4 men in the ring. Arn hits the DDT on Morton, which Flair capitalizes with a cover and a handful of tights, because, of course, Flair has to cheat. 1, 2, 3. An absolute, this is what you would expect. Nothing crazy special, but these guys, it was nice, clean work with guys that know each other really well. And they could do it in their sleep. We see Gene Okerlund again with the winners. Arn calls out the New World Order and says, you guys are a bunch of cowards for picking spots to attack when nobody's around to get them back. But there's no way they can pick their spots when the doors close for War Games. Flair's still convinced that Hogan gave up at the Clash, but it doesn't really matter. So he's still hyping up the fact that he thought he tapped before Scott Hall and Kevin Nash got involved. Nevertheless, get ready now because War Games isn't in New York. It's not in Chicago. It's not in LA. It's in Winston-Salem, home of, by God, the Four Horsemen. So that was a nice little promo by Ric Flair. And followed by that, we get another Glacier ad. And I think we have our first shot of nostalgia in the next match here, which is the TV debut. We should almost take 3 shots for this. It's a TV debut of Chris Jericho in WCW, and it feels like he should be there. Much like Juventud Guerrera, Chris Jericho feels like he should be here and has been here for a very long time. And he just fits so perfectly on here, and it's crazy to think in 2022, in 2 short days, I'll be seeing him wrestle Bryan Danielson in what's sure to be a match-stealing card. Or match-stealing match, I should say. Or card-stealing match, brother. I'm all hyped up. So, Alex Wright versus Chris Jericho goes to a no contest. So, this is his debut. He was supposed to debut at the Clash. Didn't happen. I guess they had 8 matches shoved in 2 hours, and they wanted to make Jericho's debut happen on another spot. Early in the match, they go for drop kicks. Jericho works on the hammerlock, uses submissions. He starts flying around a bit. Wright gets a lot of offense in, and Alex Wright is a serviceable worker for sure. Jericho walks around ringside. Wright goes off the top, but the Jericho moves and Wright eats the guardrail. Jericho rolls back and stops the ref's 10 count, but he doesn't want to win that way, that white meat babyface, so the ref declares the match a no contest. 4 minutes and 51 seconds. The crowd does boo the decision, but Bischoff praises the man for wanting to win the right way. So we have a shot of nostalgia for the no contest. Cheers. So Chris Jericho's debut goes out in that fashion. He looked good, though. Hit some of the hits and some of the moves that we still see. Springboard dropkick off the floor, or to the floor, I should say. Some vintage stuff from Jericho, and this was his WCW debut. And he becomes one of the best parts of Nitro. So I can't wait to see where this goes. So Gene's in the middle of these two for the interview. Jericho wants to win fair and square, which is something Hogan doesn't do anymore. So Alex wants to say something, but Gene decides, nah, Alex, you don't have anything to say. Which was kind of funny. Rick and Scott Steiner defeat the Blue Bloods. So this match goes 3 minutes and 29 seconds. So we see Rick, Taylor buries a knee into Rick and hoists him up on the shoulders for a doomsday device. Rick catches Bobby Eaton in midair, slams him down for the mat for the 1-2-3. Story comes after the match. Taylor tries to beat up Eaton for the loss, but Eaton fights back and hits a swinging neckbreaker. He heads up to the top, and Taylor gets the heck out of Dodge before he can deliver the Alabama Jam. They brawl all the way to the back. So the Blue Bloods, we know that there's a lot of heat between Dave Taylor and Robert Eaton. They're arguing the full match, dissension in there. So we know that Regal's pulled away from the Blue Bloods, and Dave Taylor and Robert Eaton are imploding. Coincidence? I think not. We see another Mean Gene spot here. He talks at the Steiners, and Rick thinks the next pay-per-view is Halloween Havoc. He doesn't mention Fall Brawl. Steiners want Harlem Heat and the tag titles of Fall Brawl, so that's the match we're getting again. We have our main event here. Sting and Lex Luger taking on Benoit and Steve McMichael with the ladies. It goes to a DQ, so of course we got to take another shot here. On a Friday here on the Tavern, of course. I'm drinking alone, but I'm not drinking alone because you guys are here watching with me, and I appreciate you guys hanging out with me as we continue our drive towards All Out and throughout 1996, getting our wrestling weekend started. Of course, stay tuned after this for WrestleMania 8. Before our time, Nick and young Anthony will talk everything about WrestleMania 8, and we get what should have been Flair versus Hulk Hogan. We get Flair versus Macho Man for the title. We also get Sid Justice versus Hulk Hogan. And I'm sure they'll give you all the details about why they didn't go with Hogan and Flair. And we talked about it a lot on here, that some of the house shows, they didn't bear as much, I guess, chemistry as they probably wanted on a big stage. And they panicked and pulled the button. Maybe they thought they could do it another time. But WrestleMania 8 it was. But yeah, stay tuned for that following this. Right after us, stay on the Tavern, the YouTube channel, Twitch, Twitter, wherever you consume us, Facebook. We're all over the place. But they'll be coming to you at 10 p.m. Eastern. Sting and Lex Luger versus Chris Benoit and Steve McMichael with the ladies. So we see Ted DiBiase still in his seat. Sting and Luger storm the ring. And this match goes hard from the start. Mongo stops Luger with a hot shot, tags in Benoit. We see a hot tag to Sting midway through the match. He goes for the Scorpion Deathlock on Benoit. McMichael tries to get the save, but Sting releases the hold, drop kicks him to the floor. Chaos breaks up. Hogan shows up at ringside with a can of black spray paint. Mongo backs him around ringside, but it's all a trap. Of course it is. Here comes Hall, Nash, over the rail on the deck Mongo. We get a DQ. The refs can't control it. So I'll give you guys a little bit about what goes on before I take the shot. So Benoit takes the outsider's edge while Sting takes a jackknife powerbomb from Nash. They get their back spray painted. This is the first time we see spray paint on someone's back. Spray paint's becoming a thing here. We see the title spray painted. Now they're spray painting people. And it has me wondering how you're going to get the spray paint off. Maybe they have a solution. It reminds me of that story with Bad News Brown. I don't have to go too much on a diatribe about Bad News Brown and Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 6, where Piper painted half his body black, was wearing the white glove, and Andre the Giant got rid of the special solution that's supposed to get this paint off, because obviously he wanted the paint to be sweat resistant, and Andre the Giant got rid of it, so Roddy Piper had to spend, I don't know how many days, he talks about in his book, it's multiple days, and in the airport in Toronto, going through customs and stuff, with half his body painted with black paint. So, I mean, what are you going to do? It's Andre the Giant. So, Flair and Arn try to get the save, and they do okay, and then get sprayed in the eyes with the spray paint. Flair gets the black paint sprayed right across the top of his head like a skunk. So, from there, NWO just taking the extreme heat, and the crowd throws garbage in the ring again. Once they're done with the crowd, they hijack the announce position and make jokes. And anything less would be too civilized, is what they say. Finally get their mic cut as we fade to black. Chaos with the Four Horsemen, Sting, and Luger all down inside the ring. So this was the best ending of a Nitro I think we've seen thus far. The chaotic nature has been ramping up from week to week, and they're just using the chaos to build into each week, and we see the momentum going. So let me take the shot of nostalgia before we talk about the Fall Brawl card that we haven't set for September 15th. Man. So we have a lot of matches set for September 15th, which is about 3 weeks away or 2 weeks away at this point. We're going to be covering it next week. So, of course, we have Diamond Dallas Page versus Chavo Guerrero. We have Scott Norton versus Ice Train. We have the Mexican Heavyweight Championship on the line. Conan versus Juventud Guerrera. Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho. The WCW World Tag Team Champions, Harlem Heat versus the Steiners. I'm going to put the card on the bottom here so you guys can see it. The WCW World Tag Team Champions, Harlem Heat versus the Steiners. Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho, the Giant versus Randy Savage. And of course, our main event that's been built up really well, a War Games match. Sting and Luger putting their differences aside with the Horsemen, Flair and Arn Anderson versus the New World Order. So that's the matches we have for Fall Brawl. Like I said, we're going to be covering that next week. I'll show you guys the graphic while we have it. So this graphic will have... So obviously, as you guys can see, we're going to be covering that next week, the September 9th go-home show of Nitro, but also we're going to be covering Fall Brawl in its entirety, and I know Mike is a huge fan of Fall Brawl and everything that entails, and this was the staple of going back to school and taking in autumn and saying goodbye to summer. Do it with us, and we're lined up too at this point, so when we aired this episode, we're going to be airing next week's episode September 9th, and we're going to be airing it September 9th, so we're kind of in cohesion before we move ahead of it. So what more can you ask for? Leading in fall, saying goodbye to summer. But we have our next Nitro here to talk about. It's WCW Monday Nitro, September 2nd, 1996 from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And guess what? That's today's date. So Chattanooga, Tennessee, UTC Arena from, live from Tennessee, as I mentioned. So going through these matches, our current champ, everyone's the same. Aside from Lord Steven Regal, who won the title back on August 20th, 1996 on a house show. So they aired it, I believe they aired it on August 31st, as they mentioned in the newsletter, but he's the champ here. Would have been nice to show it on TV, but what can you do? We open up, and they make it clear that the U.S. Open coverage of the USA Network is a great week for WCW, which means that Raw will be preempted again. So they go unopposed. Tony Schiavone, Larry Zbyszko lead us in, and we get our opening match, Diamond Dallas Page taking on Alex Wright. This match, again, this is a good example of Diamond Dallas Page coming into his own and figuring out who he was as a competitor. It definitely helped that this crowd was super hot from the jump. DDP stomps him around and then delivers a tilt-a-world slam. Sit-down powerbomb, gets a 2. Crowd pops for it. Alex Wright shoves off a diamond cutter, attempts to catch Page with a belly-to-belly suplex for another near fall. Alex Wright goes back with all fancy stuff like doing flips off of DDP's chest. And DDP looks at him and drops him with a diamond cutter, which gets a huge pop for the 1-2-3. DDP starting to do the move that got him really, really over in 1997, as we see in 1998 as well, by being the People's Champion. The diamond cutter is coming from any position. We obviously Randy Orton, everyone talks about RKO out of nowhere, but we see DDP doing more of that. The finisher is very versatile, and it's very much getting him over. He went from a non-entity that people weren't reacting to a must-see, and the crowd pops for him, and he's really getting the hang of who he wants to be as a character, and that's the biggest compliment I can give for someone like DDP. And we see him catch fire. Eventual world champion, winds up in WWF in 2002, but his run in 97, 98, from what I understand, I wasn't watching live, but he was the guy that everybody wanted to be the face of the company, and eventually they went with him. The moment where he's in the crowd by winning the championship, doing the diamond symbol in the crowd. What else can you ask for? And it all started with them just pushing him with and letting him get that diamond cutter over. And there's something to be said about a finisher that can happen out of nowhere. The stunner was the same way. I'm not saying Austin or DDP were just over because of their finishers, but certainly didn't hurt having a finisher that people can react to and they know it's coming. And so when it's hit, people pop. Think about the pop that the stunner gets. It's the same thing with the diamond cutter as it evolves. Gene Okerlund, who's been a staple of our show, interrogates ref Nick Patrick again for possibly being slow on the pinfall in the last match. So Nick Patrick is trying to defend himself. He's not leaning fully into being a heel yet, but we know that he eventually will. After the break, Gene's in the locker room with Colonel Rob Parker and Sherry. So again, just highlighting them. They are still in the corner of Harlem Heat. And we do see the aforementioned Harlem Heat defending their championships against Greg Valentine and Buddy Valentino. This match was mercilessly 4 minutes and 45 seconds too much on this match. It should have been less than that. Parker and Sherry aren't out here where they need to be, but then again, they are wrestling a has-been and a never was. Bobby Valentino looks like an awful lot like Buddy Rose. This is like straight from the 80s, Buddy Valentino and Greg Valentine. Doesn't have a time and place here. They get dominated by Harlem Heat. It looks like they've changed plans for Fall Brawl, and Harlem Heat will defend the tag belts against Nasty Boys instead of the Steiners. And speaking of the Nasties, they do come out and attack Harlem Heat during the post-match interview and beat them up all the way to the commercial break. So maybe we'll see something in the newsletter next week about why they changed their plans, because they were hyping up just the last episode of Nitro that the Steiners would be getting their shot. But I wonder what happened. Here's the match we want to talk about here. Chris Jericho defeating Dean Malenko. So by logic, you would think Chris Jericho would be taking on Alex Wright after what happened because you'd want to right the wrong. It was a non-finish. Story's written. But no, they go with Dean Malenko, and we're all happy about it. Jericho meets Benoit at Fall Brawl in 2 weeks, and Malenko was just feuding with Benoit, so we guess that's the connection. Mike Tenay comes into commentary for this match, and he'll be part of the second hour broadcast, but he also comes in for some of these cruiserweight matches, and rightfully so. This match was absolutely awesome. 9 minutes and 1 second. Some of the highlights here. We see a nasty brainbuster from Malenko sending Jericho rolling into the ropes. Tenay announces Rey Mysterio will defend the cruiserweight title at Fall Brawl against the newcomer Super Callow. He's great as well, so I'm very excited to see him start appearing on our TV. We saw in the newsletter he popped up. And we look over, DiBiase's leaving during the match. So they're showing him, and I'm all for progressing storylines, but for a match like this, I got frustrated, to be honest with you, when they start not talking about the match or they show other things going on. I just want to enjoy the action from two absolute legends in the ring. Jericho fights with an electric chair drop. Malenko hits a butterfly suplex and grabs an ab stretch. He pulls on the ropes for leverage. We see the ending see us get Malenko reversing a tombstone piledriver for a really close near fall. They go back and forth trying for another German suplex, and then Jericho counters into a torso roll-up for a quick 3. An amazing back and forth battle that really exemplifies why Jericho is the Lionheart, the go-getter, the absolute babyface. We saw the Lionheart appear on Dynamite. He refused to quit and wasn't afraid to bring his best to Malenko and fight fire with fire. This was a great, great match on free TV, mind you. So cannot complain about it. I love Dean Malenko. I love him so much. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. And I wish he wrestled longer than he was and got a little bit more of the mainstay in the main event in other places. And I think maybe the fact that he was undersized or wasn't the best promo, he might be the best worker in all of WCW at this moment. And that's including Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. And I think they probably would admit that. So I love everything about this match. Go back and watch it. I watched it a second time. That's how good it was. So Dean Malenko, I can't wait to see Jericho versus Benoit. We know the history with them and eventually all those titles over the Intercontinental title on different pay-per-views. We saw them match up at WrestleMania in that triple threat. There's a lot to be said about the history of these guys, and Jericho falls in that fold of the Eddies, the Benoits, the Malenkos, interchangeable, and you're guaranteed to get a 4 to 5 star match on any given night, and rightfully so. And Jericho's still out there doing it, so it's awesome stuff. So we get a video package that's showing Rey Mysterio and Super Calo. So again, using footage and history from other promotions to build up importance. And now people know that they should care about Super Calo instead of just blindly trying to repackage him as your own thing. And I know that WWF, WWE has more of that mindset that they don't want people, I guess, getting the credit to change the channel. But that is an insecurity that hurts more than helps. Because with a guy like Super Calo getting a title shot on his debut match here in WCW, it makes you feel like why it's important. And I know AEW does a little bit of that, but they didn't do it enough during the Forbidden Door build. All you need to do is show some highlights and make people feel that you don't have to say the things at all the times. It doesn't have to be like you give the full match results, but showing highlights and having commentary explain different matches. And they did a decent job, I guess, if you think about it, with Will Ospreay. But I don't know. I think WCW does a really good job of that. With Mike Tenay, he's like the special guy who comes out and reads off. He's like their insider who is tracking and scouting all these different promotions in different countries. And he's giving information, and it holds a lot of weight when you're watching it. So if you're watching along with us, you probably know exactly what I mean. So we get the Giant defeating Brad Armstrong in a quick match, 3 minutes and 48 seconds. So outside the building before the match, a black limo pulls up that we don't know if it holds the NWO. We're not sure. Again, this is more distractions going on during a match. I'm okay with it happening during this match because, again, this match is the Giant versus Brad Armstrong, which we know what's going to happen. Eventually it ends in a chokeslam, and yes, it does. Nothing happens with the limo following that. But we do get a following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order, and this time it's just Hogan talking about Flair, Arn, Sting, Luger, and they're just hyping up War Games at Fall Brawl, which, again, this is the go-home show. They're trying to get all their eggs in this basket to make sure we're all prepared for it. But the build has been very solid that if this was something I had to pay for, I'd be ready to do so because the build feels like you can't miss it. And that's what's really awesome about the build here. We get hour number 2. Bischoff Heenan for the first time on Nitro. Mike Tenay joining full-time. So we do see Mike Tenay, as I mentioned, throughout the Cruiserweight matches, but he's here for other matches as well. We get a recap of last week's Nitro when the NWO sprayed a painted Turner Production trailer. Ted DiBiase showed up and flashed the numbers 4 and 5. And then they show when NWO came out and beat up the Horsemen. So, again, recapping, making sure you guys are aware of what's going on. Even when Hogan and Hall and Nash are not on the show, you're getting important things, I guess, put on a plate for you so you guys, it's easily digestible. But it doesn't seem condescending or overdone. It's the perfect mix. So we get Randy Savage defeating Ron Studd in the next match. It was nice to see Randy in action here. Would have liked to see him wrestle somebody else. Quick match, as you'd imagine, 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Seems like anytime someone's feuding with the Giant, they have to go through Ron Studd. This is the second time we've seen this. Studd was manhandling Savage for a second, and Hall and Nash start to get out of the limo in the back when they show in the highlights. Hogan pops his head out and tells him to get back inside when he spots the cameraman. Studd gets yanked to the floor for a flying double axe, the classic Savage spot. Back inside, Savage slams the big guy and drops the macho elbow for the win. Okerlund interviews Savage, the winner, after the match. And he also talks about he has 2 big matches coming up in the next 2 pay-per-views. Of course, we talk about the Giant at Fall Brawl, this grudge match they're having, and Hogan for the WCW World title at Halloween Havoc. Randy continues and talks about the Giant, how he couldn't handle the pressure of defending the title on the biggest stage and gave it up to Hogan and the NWO. And now I'm taking over from here on out. Savage guarantees a victory in both these matches. And we go from there. So Savage is fired up. And they're building up Halloween Havoc again on September 2nd. It's not for over a month, and we're still getting a build towards it. We have the next match here. We have another DQ finish. Sting and Luger versus Rick and Scott Steiner. So right after everybody makes their entrances, we get cut to the back where the Horsemen are going after the limo. And there's nobody inside now, even though we just saw Hogan and the crew. So this match gets cut short, probably too short. It would have been a really good match, but probably save it for a pay-per-view. Goes 38 seconds. Nick Patrick gets grazed, and he calls for the DQ for being touched by a wrestler. So more heel tactics from our buddy Nick Patrick. The crowd is absolutely pissed. No other word for it. Incensed. They're angry. And, I think this has to do with the fact that Scott Steiner's hurt, which probably, now that I'm thinking about it, they did say that in the newsletter. That's probably why they pulled him off the tag title match. It's hard to say, where the injury happened, but he'll be out a whole, I think, 4 months following this. So we'll take the shot of nostalgia. Sucks that this match didn't happen in full, but I'm looking forward to hopefully down the line we get a match like this, because I can't wait to see Sting and Luger versus Rick and Scott Steiner. All right, so we have our main event here, and it's absolutely insane. We have the Horsemen versus the Dungeon of Doom. So where to even start here? So the match is the match at this point. We get 13 minutes and 54 seconds. So I'll go through some of the spots of the match, and of course the most important thing is what happened after the match. So we know the Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom are completely intertwined. We got Mongo starting the match. He takes a Bossman straddle and heads to the floor. By the way, Dungeon of Doom at this point consists of Kevin Sullivan, Big Bubba, the Face of Fear, as totality. So that's the actual unit right now. I know they haven't been featured so much on TV since their main February spotlight, I would say. They've taken a backseat for sure. They're still kind of hanging around. We see Kevin Sullivan from week to week on shows, but here we are. Mongo blocks the slide to the floor, uppercut, and brings Bubba back in for a backdrop. Benoit drops a swan dive headbutt on the Barbarian, but now we get Flair versus Ming. To the back we go. Sting and Luger are chasing Nick Patrick all the way outside to the black limo. He doesn't actually go to the NWO's limo. Instead, he goes behind some semi-truck. Sting and Luger give up on Nick Patrick and go after DiBiase, who's getting inside the limo. So Sting throws a cinder block through the car door window, so the limo drives off instead of getting into their own car. Sting and Luger hijack a police car and start to drive after him. That's right. Hijack a police car. So absolute chaos. This is still going on during the match. So we get back inside the ring. Flair is getting the crowd excited by dishing out low blows to the Dungeon of Doom. Arn hits a DDT on Ming and pays for it by getting caught in the Tree of Woe and the running knee strike from Sullivan. Moving on, Benoit gets tossed over the top rope and Flair saves him by threatening to use a big blue chair. Back inside, Bubba eats a boot when he tries something off the middle rope. Continuing, we get a hot tag to Flair. He destroys Sullivan and a shin breaker applies the figure four while everybody is fighting on the outside. Benoit tells Woman to assist Rick if she's really for the Four Horsemen. To prove her allegiance, she goes over to give Flair the extra leverage help as Sullivan's shoulders drop to the mat for the 3 count. 13 minutes and 54 seconds. Really fun match in the main event. Everybody went all out. The crowd was really excited. Tennessee was really excited to see WCW come to town. But we're not done yet. The crowd we would have been okay ending the match here, ending the night here, but we're not done. As I mentioned, the New World Order hits the ring and they start absolutely just beating everybody up. And here comes the Giant to make the save. But not really. He chokeslams Barbarian and chokeslams Ming. Giant and Nash hug, and it's official. The Giant became the 5th member of the New World Order. And then now Savage is incensed. He runs to the ring with a steel chair. Giant gets nailed. Hall gets nailed. Nash then gets a chair shot to the face. And now there's Hogan. The Crowd's going absolutely insane. The crowd is wild. Let me just emphasize, if you're not watching this, they're absolutely going wild. They want to see Hogan get destroyed. It just shows the great heel work that Hogan's doing. Hogan is cowering in the corner. Savage is trying to swing the chair at him. Hogan then hits a low blow, and then Giant, Hall, and Nash continue to keep the Horsemen and Dungeon Doom on the floor while Hogan nails Savage several times in his head with the chair. And then Giant gets back in the ring, chokeslams Savage to set up a repeat of Bash at the Beach as Hogan delivers not one, not two, but 3 leg drops on Macho Man. And here we go with the spray paint. We got the NWO letter spray painted on his chest, and then Hogan pulls out a can of yellow paint and then sprays the streak down Savage's spine. Man, the new foursome take over the announce position. Giant tries to explain why he turned on WCW. It makes no sense to me. So Hogan interrupts him several times, but you can tell where it was going. Like he was just saying that he didn't want to be a part of. He was sick of carrying the weight. He wanted to join the leading team. He lost the title. He tried his best. Savage even was going after him. Man, everybody clears out. Giant and Hogan return to the announce table. And whether you like it or you don't, it's the best thing going today. We hear that quote a lot. I think this is the debut of it. They turn the table over and walk out as Hogan continues to get extreme heat from the crowd. This is exemplary heel work by Hulk Hogan. It was an absolute amazing finish to a crazy night. This is a classic ending to Nitro. So, I don't know, the thing I was left thinking, like, in all this chaos, how they can explain Sting and Luger stealing a cop car and why they're not serving serious jail time. But either way, an absolutely insane ending to the night. And we'll talk about it more as we get to it. But the Giant joining the New World Order feels forced and anticlimactic, and at the time it creates a moment. Of course, it's all about the moments and getting people excited for things happening. But without someone on the other side, the Giant at the time was an unstoppable force that was opposing the New World Order. And I think that's where the New World Order started to fall into pitfalls by having no one to oppose them. And I understand that's not real life, that you're not always going to have equal forces on equal sides, face and heels, good guys, bad guys. But I think this is where it sort of turned in a direction where it should have. I think the Giant for himself, and we've seen other shoot interviews where they talked about it, where Hogan and Nash and Hall have been accused of having the Giant join them, I guess to keep the Giant from prospering in lieu of them. And while they talk about how it would help his career, and ultimately, I mean, you can't really complain. The Giant's career, Paul White, the Big Show, went off to do amazing things, a Hall of Fame level career. But he was still such a young person in this spot that I would like to see where he could have went as a face. To have him take a backseat to 3 other big personalities, it feels like it hurt his career more than help at the time. And it's all at this point conjecture as far as people's opinion. But I personally like what they were doing with the face Giant. And it seemed like there was more story to be told than having him join the New World Order just yet. That's just my opinion. But you know, you can watch any of the shoot interviews, and I think there is a little bit of regret on at least Paul White's side for joining the New World Order. But we still have a lot of good story to be told here. This isn't the end of... We're not even reaching the height yet. The story is going to continue to progress to a point where people are going to be tuning in exclusively to pretty much WCW. It's going to win the ratings war by a lot going forward. And I think at this point, this has to be the start of the 83 weeks where they just absolutely lambast WWF. They absolutely just take them to school with things like this, the extremely hot, crazy endings. The crowd is whipped into a frenzy. This can't be replicated. And what's going on the other channel is not like this. We do eventually get crowds like this and moments like this in 1998 and some in 1997, but mostly 1998 and 1999 with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon and things that came from that. But you have to imagine, like, the chaotic nature of ending the show like this creates a buzz and makes people want to tune in next week. And I think that's really what's been missing from wrestling in the past decade. Really, it just hasn't had the urgency to have to check it out. It may just be how people consume wrestling at this point, that we're all used to just, you know, it's content. Just get it out there, put it on TV. But there's no... Think about how the plan is at this point. Halloween Havoc, 1996, the card's shaping out already. We're over a month away. You can't say the same about any pay-per-view. I know Clash of the Castle's been really built because, you talk about that with WWE right now, with Drew McIntyre, and also the Riddle and the Seth Rollins match has been built over time for a very long time. But for the most part, we didn't have full cards being built out months at a time. And that just shows just how light years ahead they are of WWF at the time of their booking strategy. They have long-term plans, and I think eventually when they run out of those NWO plans and they stop doing new things, people do get sick, because when you burn bright, sometimes you burn out pretty fast. But when they were burning bright, man, this was a lot of fun. And like, this ending was one of those endings you watch and like, I see why people love WCW. I see why people got into being diehard fans and why they will defend them at any cost. I see why the Chads will defend WCW at any corner, because this is the moments they created, and this was a lot of fun. This was stuff you weren't getting in 1996 on the other channel. It just wasn't happening. So they were trailblazers in a lot of ways. They set the tone for what wrestling would be like. They initiated this boom. I won't have it any other way. I know that WCW initiated this boom with Hall and Nash. They don't get the credit they deserve for creating the landscape we are, not only for the talent, but for the fans at this point, to extend wrestling more than just a regional carnival level show. It became immersive, where it was reality based. It was evident why 1996 is considered one of the better years in WCW and why they did so well in the ratings with an ending like this. I can't gush enough about how great it was. Do I agree with the Giant turning heel? No. But it worked, and people still show this highlight today. And to get people so incensed that they throw garbage in the ring, and the heat that Hogan was getting was so organic. People wanted to boo him. They couldn't stand him for what he did. Absolutely epic ending to this match. And the chaotic matches get more and more insane every week. And based off of what goes on with Fall Brawl, man, I cannot wait to see what happens. We have one more episode of Nitro before we get to Fall Brawl. About 2 banging episodes of WCW next week that we're going to get into. And again, the Fall Brawl card looks like this so far, September 15th. We're going to be having, like I mentioned, DDP versus Chavo, Scott Norton versus Ice Train, Conan versus Juvi Guerrera, Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Super Callow, Benoit versus Jericho, Harlem Heat versus the Nasty Boys, the Giant versus Savage, and of course the main event, the War Games match. People remember this match really fondly. Sting, Luger, Flair, and Arn versus the New World Order. It's going to be an epic night of wrestling. Can't wait. I'm going to grab some popcorn, watch all of it when I get back from Chicago. Really take it in. So we're going to move into the chaser. I'm going to talk about my favorite parts of the last 2 nights of Nitro, man. All right, as you know, the Chaser is the spot that we talk about our favorite parts of the 2 nights of Nitro. And there's a couple spots that I want to talk about. First off is the ending I just gushed about for about 10 minutes. Absolutely epic ending where you're on the edge of your seat. You cannot believe what's going on. And I would say the other match has to be Chris Jericho versus Dean Malenko. This is his second match ever in WCW. 2 weeks in a row he's being featured. Gets the win over Dean. And this Cruiserweight division is really shaping up to be a formidable foe for any storyline they have going on. And like I mentioned before, I say it week after week. People come for the storylines and the big stars. They stay for the Cruiserweight, the technical wrestling that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And, the one criticism I have is that they are highlighting story over some of these matches by going the backstage and talking about different things. They're not fully immersed in that match in the moment. Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay or Bobby Heenan, they will mention stuff about the New World Order in the middle of a banging match between Jericho and Malenko. But that's nitpicking, because part of what makes the story so great in WCW is the fact that it intertwines with every single thing going on. And that's some of the credit they're giving to Triple H the last couple of weeks, at this point a month or so that he's been in charge of Raw and SmackDown, really, is they're creating an immersive environment where everything runs into each other. It's not just segmented spots where you can pull something out of the card and place it somewhere else, and it doesn't have anything to do with each other. You're creating a universe. You're creating a world where everything operates and reacts to each other And that's where WCW was firing on all cylinders, where everything affected everything. So I think that's when wrestling's at its best, when you have the different characters and different interactions. It doesn't have to be backstage interaction. It doesn't have to be feuds. It's just showing the world as it is by having people cross over. Stuff with the limo, stuff in the backstage area, stuff with people just walking by. Having people that wouldn't be feuding interact with each other. That's what WCW is doing well. That's what WWE is starting to do really well right now. And that's what AEW is not doing well. So that for me personally, I do enjoy that. I like when you can see things and you can feel the story being it's deeper than just the singular feud you're watching on TV. You know, there's a backstage world. There's a whole universe that exists with all these different characters that interact with each other. And like I said, WCW does a really good job of that. You wonder what goes on in the back for WCW with the New World Order, and like how would DDP react to him? And chances are we will see that. We'll see DDP interact with the NWO even prior to his main event push. And that's the beautiful part about this, is that guys like Harlem Heat too, you wonder about how they're going to interact with the NWO. We see the Nasty Boys talk about NWO. You hear Gene Okerlund give his opinion on it. It's affecting everybody on the roster, and there's certain characters that are not pretending it doesn't exist. I think a lot of times in wrestling, there's a certain storyline happening, people pretend it's not existing. You heard nobody else on the AEW roster during the MJF stuff mention it. When something big happens on the show, or the CM Punk stuff, people just go out and have their match, and there's no mention of it. So I think there needs to be more emphasis of having different, storylines affect different people and bleed into each other. Because that's when it becomes, we talk about blurring the line of reality. Blurring the line of storytelling is even better as well, when everything affects everything. So those are my chasers. We're going to close the tab. The lights are coming on the bar, and we got to go, man, because it's time for me to go to Rampage, live with Mike Belcaster and Tom, the OG Fig Kid. All right, so we are about 3/4 of the way done with season 1 of Shot Nostalgia. So, of course, we will be coming to you in November when this is all said and done. When we wrap the season of filming for Shot Nostalgia season 1 with WCW 1996, we'll be talking about ECW 1995. But before we get there, we have a lot of episodes to get there, and you don't know what kind of guests are going to be appearing on the show. So next week, as I mentioned, we will be having this big episode. Mike will be returning with me September 9th, WCW Monday Nitro, and we're going to be also having Fall Brawl War Games, and absolutely incredible event. We're definitely going to dive deep into the newsletter as well and talk everything you want to know. As I mentioned, we're going to be moving pretty swiftly through this. I know Halloween Havoc is approaching, and this is kind of why we made the schedule the way it was. We actually have the ability to line up with the seasons of times, and I know I'm going to pull up the schedule right now. Halloween Havoc is going to line up during spooky season, which is really cool, because I think it'd be weird, and I give the Before Our Time guys a lot of credit to be sitting here and doing the Before Our Time. It's like watching Christmas movies during non-Christmas season. That's how I feel about WrestleMania. But so I give them a lot of credit doing that. So episode 21, like I mentioned, will be next week, September 9th Nitro, and the WCW Fall Brawl 1996. So we have the episode 22, September 16th and September 23rd, Nitro. And then moving forward for bigger episodes, October 7th, 1996. Well, I should say October. I'm back in the past. October 7th, 2022 is Halloween Havoc 1996. So that episode will be there. And of course, we're up with the guest. The one person we know is going to be on here is the debut of Sting, Crow Sting, coming back after leaving. So we're going to see the departure of Sting very soon. Probably be following War Games, and then moving forward, he returns as that vigilante hanging in the rafters. Crow Sting is going to be debuting, and we're going to have the One Bad Chad joining us for that episode. So you don't know who's going to show up. You may have Matt from Extra Cooler. You may have Nick Storm may show up. Young Anthony. Who knows? You don't know. You got to tune in for all of this. So let's do some shilling while we're here. Go to the turnbuckletavern.com, join the community. You guys can follow us, everything we're doing here, whether it be Long Balls, our new football show with Hawk and J-Bone. Follow us for the Raw Down, AEW Wrap-Up Show, Certain to have it hanging at the tavern soon. The GCW show will be returning as well. Get all your needs here. Buy a shirt. Did I mention shirt, guys? You can get one of these great shirts, Shot Nostalgia, that purple pops. If you see me walking around all out, say hi. I'll probably be rocking that purple Shot Nostalgia shirt. Come say hi. Mike Belcaster has stickers. We'll give you guys some Turnbuckle Tavern stickers. Buy some merch. Support the tavern. Come say hi to us. If you're in Chicago, come say hi to us. We're around. And if you guys want, go to Teespring. Check it out. The Anti-Taskmaster shirt. I brought the shirt with me. It's packed. I may wear it as well. Even though Kevin Sullivan's my dude now, he still likes the heat, though. Check that out because it's coming soon. Again, we're going to be seeing all you guys. If you're in Chicago, please come say hi to myself, Mike Belcaster, Tom, Hawk may be by. If you see us, we're around. We'll be at GCW. We'll also be at Rampage. We'll be at All Out, obviously. We'll be at Chicago hanging out. So feel free to come say hi to us. Stephen ACEFIELD and Mike Belcaster and Tom, we all love talking wrestling with whoever. So I appreciate you guys watching. This has been a lot of fun. We miss Mike Belcaster dearly. He right now is hanging out and getting ready, full transparency, to go hang out and go to Dynamite tonight from Chicago. I think Tom will be joining him. I'll be joining the two of them tomorrow night. So that while this airs, I'll already be in Chicago, fully immersed into that world and talking and getting ready for All Out. But I do appreciate you guys watching this. We'll be returning with both of us next week. I'm putting it out there. And again, I've been the Ace. This is Shot Nostalgia, Turnbuckle Tavern. We're out of time. We gotta go!